recording of this session. So hi everyone, I welcome you all into this API workshop. Okay, I think all of you know me. This workshop has been planned only for the known people who know me by any means, or who have been struggling with the APIs, or who have requested me to do some kind of session on around APIs. Right. So this session is not only focused towards Boomi, right? Though our intention, the end goal is that we should be able to leverage APIs in Boomi, but that's not my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is to make sure the people who are going to attend all these series of sessions, right, do really have a good understanding about APIs as a subject, right? So that whether we work on MuleSoft tomorrow, or maybe we work on any API management tools such as Epg, Xway, right, or any other tool for that matter, we should have some conceptual knowledge. Okay. So before we start talking about APIs and all, and I'll tell you why the new developers lack the knowledge about APIs, and they have a very limited knowledge, is because of the fact that they typically lack the knowledge on a topic called a SOA. Okay. So if you want to understand APIs, right, especially from the integration standpoint, right? So when we work in the integration world, our APIs have a strong connectivity with SOA, right? APIs are a very generic terminology, but right now, since we all are working in integration arena, right? So our APIs understanding has strong connection with SOA, which is service oriented architecture, right? And since people do not discuss about this topic when they are in the Boomi world, or maybe when even they start their journey on MuleSoft or any of the modern tools, right? So that becomes a problem, and because of which that conceptual knowledge is missing. So we'll start our sessions from SOA, right? I used to do a lot of trainings on Oracle SOA suite earlier, so we'll start it from there, and gradually we will switch our gears to get into the Boomi, right? So let me tell you, SOA is a very generic terminology. I think many of you might have heard of it. So SOA stands for service
oriented architecture.
Oriented architecture. So a lot of people assume that this is a technology, which is incorrect, right? As the name suggests, service oriented architecture. It means the core is around services, right? So the orientation of this architecture, or the baseline of this architecture, is around services. This architecture has been implemented by different vendors, right? And they have given different tools. They have come up with different tools. So one of the tool you might have heard of is Oracle SOA suite, right? There are different ESBs in the market. What does ESB stand for? Enterprise Service Bus.
Service bus.
Right? Example is IIB. What is IIB? IBM Integration Bus. Right? Then there is OSB. What is OSB? Oracle Service Bus. Right? Then there is Software AG Web Methods. Right? There are different ESBs. These all ESBs have service oriented architecture as it at its core, right? So you will see ESBs are the software which helps in basically achieving the integration following the service oriented architecture. So whenever we talk about any ESB, enterprises service bus, which helps or which acts as an integration layer, among different applications of the enterprise, you will see these all ESBs we have, they typically follow service oriented architecture, right? So now when we say the core is around services, we need to understand what is a service, right? So I personally say SOA is about two things: services and messages, right? So that these are two building blocks of service oriented architecture: services and messages. What does services mean? Service means it refers to any business functionality. Services means it can be any business functionality. Example, addition of two number can be a service, right? Or Validating the credentials of a user can be a service, right? Inserting the data into a data source can be a service. So likewise, there can be many services. This services caters certain business functionalities. So there are certain expectations around services, right? These are reusable. These are complete within itself, or these have to be complete within itself. These can be combined together with other services to design a business process. These typically needs to be easily accessible, right? See, there is also an interlink between these things, right? What you have to understand is, if something you want to be reusable, right, you have to make it easily accessible or not, right? So let's say there are 5 people, right? Okay, there are 5 people living in an apartment. Now let's say you want the TV to be reusable. So where would you want to place the television? In the bedroom of an individual, or in the living room? In the living room, right? So that it is easily accessible, right? When you want something to be reusable, you need to make sure it is easily accessible. Then only people can reuse it, right? Then uh, so there are some more traits which a service must have, but these are the important ones, that these have to be reusable, these are complete within itself, these can be combined with other services to design a business process, right? And so this is about services, right? So when we are working on service oriented architecture, each problem statement has to be visualized or has to be solutionized in the form of services. For example, when you work in Java, right, whenever you think about any problem statement, how do you solutionize that? What is the basic crux, or what is that basic funda in terms of which you will try to break down your problem? You will follow object oriented programming. You will think everything in terms of objects. Is it correct? When we follow object oriented programming, we conceptualize everything in terms of objects. Similarly, when you're working on service oriented architecture, we visualize or conceptualize everything in terms of services, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say we have a business process, okay, and that business process is around a restaurant. First, let's understand in a layman. Okay, there is a restaurant. So basically, restaurant is a business, right? Somebody would own it, and within this, there are different services which are combined together. So, for example, there is a hospitality service. What is the meaning of hospitality service? So, typically, let's say you go to a 5-star, right? You go to a 5-star. The moment you enter into their restaurant, outside the restaurant, there will be a executive or an individual who will ask your details, who will basically talk to you, will understand your need, what exactly are you looking for, how many how many of you want to get into the restaurant, right? Their restaurant might be completely vacant, right? But still they do it as a part of the protocol, right? Then there and so that falls into hospitality, right? Then the moment you get seated on your chairs, there will be waiters. Again, that is again part of hospitality, but yeah, there'll be waiters. Then there is a kitchen service, right? In kitchen service, there will be chef who will be preparing the food for you. Then there is a billing service, right? Who will make sure that whatever orders you have placed, right, there is some separate entity, some administration, right, who is taking care of billing, right? Maybe there is one more service. Let's say there is one more department who makes sure, who takes the feedback, right? Let's say feedback service. Some of these might be overlapping, right? It might happen that this part, this part, and this part may be by the same team, or it might be different teams altogether, right? Maybe the team who takes feedback, we want to keep them completely independent so that there is no influence on the actual feedback coming from the customer. And these different services are combined together to achieve a one business process, which is a restaurant, right? Especially and similarly in our integration world, right? When we are working in a technical world, there are different services which are combined together to achieve a business functionality. And this process of combining discrete set of services into single unit to design or to develop a business process is called as orchestration. Okay, this is called as orchestration. When we combine different set of services into single unit to develop a business process, that is called as orchestration. Now, what I was saying is when we develop these services, right, these definitely need to be combined together because eventually we want to develop some business processes. And this process is called as orchestration. And I was talking about messages, right? So if you remember, if we go back, I told Suva is about two things: services, messages. Now we understand what are services. Services are nothing but certain business functionality. It might be a simple thing, it might be a complex thing, that's fine. There is another entity called as messages, right? What is message? Messages means it represents the data which is exchanged among the services. So it represents the data which is exchanged among the services. So when we will have a real-time business process, that business process might be a combination of service A, service B, service C, right? And these services typically will communicate with each other with the help of, there will be some entity called as orchestrator. Okay, what is the job of orchestrator? What is the job of orchestrator?
To combine these services into a single unit to develop business process.
Very nice. Very nice. So the job of orchestrator is to combine discrete set of services into single unit, right? In our IT companies, there will be technical team and there will be a technical lead, right? What is the job of technical lead? Technical lead will have the complete visibility of the solution to be built, right? But what will lead do is technical lead will break down that problem statement into some small modules so that the people who are going to work can focus on their own individual modules and they don't basically get confused, and eventually what this team lead will do is the team will try to merge everybody's code together. Maybe the team lead will write a wrapper which is capable of combining this discrete set of services into single unit, right? Similarly, here in the integration world, there are different services which needs to talk to each other. So typically there will be an orchestrator. So when there will be an orchestrator, how it is going to work is service A will not know about service B. Service B will not know about service C. All they know is one entity. And who is that? Orchestrator. Orchestrator is responsible for combining discrete set of services into single unit, right? So that is one way of doing it. There is another model called as choreography model. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is when these discrete set of services needs to talk to each other, there are two models. One is orchestration model, another is choreography model. In the choreography model, what happens is these services talk to each other themselves. Okay, these services talk to each other themselves, right? So here service A will talk to service B and they will know about each other. Service B will talk to service C. So there also communication is happening, but the only difference is in case of orchestration, there is a central unit, right, which knows about all the services, but these all services do not know about each other, right? Whereas when you are using choreography model, then these services interact with each other directly. That's fine. But now when we need to talk to services, we need to pass certain data, right? and that data is termed as messages, right? So messages is nothing but the data which is exchanged with the services, right? Whenever we want to communicate with the services, we need to pass certain data, and the data is known as messages. These messages can be in different formats, but typically it is recommended to have a format which is software hardware platform independent, which is human readable, okay, which occupies less bandwidth. Okay, so we try. So what happens is these services communicate with each other, and while doing so, they exchange some data which is termed as messages. And generally, the tendency is we should have a message in a format which is software platform independent, right? Which is human readable and that occupies less bandwidth. So you would see some of the data formats which are used for all this exchange are either XML. So until few years back, this used to be the predominantly used format for the data exchange. Even now, there are many services which still uses XML. So XML is not going to go away. A lot of people who start their career new, they assume that XML is not significant, which is 100% wrong. And that is where they lack the basics about APIs. XML is the crux. If you do not know XML, I really doubt that if you can develop a good knowledge on APIs. Another data format these days, which is very widely being used, is JSON. You may have some flat files also being exchanged. You may have some unstructured data also. Okay, unstructured means something like some binary data also. But generally, you would see these two formats being used more predominantly, right? Because binary data we cannot read, right? So we told this is expectation, but this may not be always true. It is not necessary that all the messages will be always human readable, but this is good to have. We may not always meet this criteria, right? Any questions so far from anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. So, somebody, this orchestration and choreography process example, this, especially this choreography, right? I have heard so many people speaking, okay, that services A communicate with services B and services B communicate with service C, and they need to know each other directly. And I have a tendency of giving a layman example, to everyone. So I talk to a lot of people, and I have hardly seen people being able to give an example which is, from our real time. So I'll give you an example. First of all, let me explain you. I mean, some of you who have attended my previous sessions also might know that this word orchestration words comes from orchestra, right? And whenever you hear about orchestra, what comes to your head? What strikes your brain first? Music,
Music band.
band, right? So what happens in orchestra typically? There is a complete setup, right? There are different musicians, there is a band, right? There will be different musicians who can play different instruments. There will be a drum beater, there might be some guitar player, there might be some uh, singers, right? And typically there will be a music director, right, who will give them direction, right, that what should be your pitch, right, who will basically give the instruction to all these parties. And in that orchestra, that music director is the core. Everybody may not know each other, but everybody knows the instructions of orchestrator, who is the music director, right? I'll give you another example. uh, The traffic lights in any city, right? You have the traffic signals and all, right? Now, is it manually managed by the traffic police? Do they go and switch on and off something lights? I mean, do they turn the signals green and red? I mean, that is possible. In some worst cases, even that happens. But in normal, on any given sunny day, let's say you're in Hyderabad or Delhi or Mumbai for that matter, right? What does it? Is it manually managed, or there is some centralized program which basically runs all these traffic signals across the city? What do you think? Why is there is such so big?
Centralized program.
Centralized.
It's definitely a centralized program, right? So let's say there is a traffic light which is right here at, let's say, Panjagutta. Panjagutta is a place in Hyderabad, those who do not know, right? Then after, let's say, after that, there is another traffic signal of, let's say, Amirpet. Okay. So Panjagutta signal do not know anything about Amirpet signal. Okay. There is a centralized program which executes all these things, and that's how it works. So that is orchestration. Choreography is, okay, now you're walking on the road. There is a person who is walking, there is a person who is walking after you. There is a person who is walking in front of you. So if that person stops, do you automatically stop? And when you stop, the person at the back of you automatically stops. Are you waiting for some centralized signal? Who is having the control in that case?
First one.
The person in front of us.
It's us, right? So just understand this. When you're a traffic signal, who is controlling it? The signals being displayed, right, control the movement of the traffic, right? It controls the movement of your car, right? Whether the person who is there in front of you, whether that person stops or not, but if the signal is red, you are supposed to stop, right? Is it correct? But when you're walking, right, when you're walking, let's say you're walking in the Amirpet streets, right? If the person in front of you stops, you automatically stop, because there you have a control based on another person's control. There is no centralized unit which is going to control that. So in the choreography, there is no centralized unit. It is a coordination among different services which takes place. Services A might talk to each other. Service A might talk to service B. Service B might talk to service C. And in the process of doing so, they keep on exchanging the messages. And these messages can be in different formats, but predominantly, essentially, you would see XML and JSON formats being used across the industry. So now when these are the formats, then having a good knowledge on these become very, very important. But before we get into that, we also need to understand that how can we define SOA, right? So for me, it is an architecture for building business applications. It is an architecture for building business application using loosely coupled services. These services, okay, using loosely coupled service, I will add here, which acts as black boxes, and these can be orchestrated together to achieve the required business functionality. So what I'm trying to say is SOA is an architecture that allows you, or that lets you to develop business application using loosely coupled services. Okay, this is one thing. Another thing is these services act as black boxes, which means service A may not know anything about the implementation of service B. Service B might not know anything about the implementation of service C. All they know is about their core functionalities, but at the same time, these can collaborate with one another to achieve the required business functionality. So SOA is like SOA is also compared like a block game we all used to play in our childhood, right? So I don't know what is a fancy name these days it is called as. So there used to be some blocks, right, which we could arrange in a different manner to build different things, right? We could arrange the blocks to build a car. We could arrange the blocks to build a building. We could arrange the blocks to build a house, right? So SOA works on loosely coupled services, and these loosely coupled services can be combined together to achieve different business functionality. These services are typically reusable. These services uh, basically communicate with each other, and these are black boxes. Okay, there is another meaning of black box, which is that it might happen that one service is developed in PHP, there might be another service which is developed in .NET, there is another service which might be developed in Java, right? But still they can talk to each other easily. That's how the service oriented architecture works. It basically helps in abstracting the technology. Also what we care is about service, right? So I'll so there are a lot of examples in our day-to-day life also, right? When you go to an ATM, right? So what is happening behind the scene? What is the technology that is kind of useless to you? It should so you go and you swipe your card, you get the money, right? So we should have a mechanism that enables us to collaborate with the service. What is the underlying technology, how that is built, those all things we need not to know. So if service A needs to basically talk to service B, service A need not to know what is the core functionality, what is the code written in service B. What all it needs to know is that how to integrate with service B or how to interface with service B, right? It does not need to know everything inside it. So for example, you go and you want to, if you want to see the television, right? How do you operate the television? With the help of a remote, right? You have a remote, right? There will be some radio signals which are exchanged, but do you need to understand who is where is a radio signal sensor, what is happening inside, which all equipments are there? You don't need to bother, right? You are a service consumer, there is a service provider, you just want to interact with that, that's all. So the point I'm trying to say is this service oriented architecture, SOA, is more or less like a client server architecture. Okay, what is client server architecture? There will be a party which is called as service consumer, which is also called as client. All right, there'll be a party which is called as service provider, which is also called as server, right? So these are two personas. Okay, these are two personas. It is not necessary that a person who is service provider will always remain a provider. Okay, I'll give you examples of this, right? What I'm trying to say is the service provider may not be always a service provider. The service provider itself might also act as a service consumer. So whenever you're working on the service oriented architecture, there are two personas: service consumer, service provider. Sometimes you might act as a service provider, at other times you might act as a service consumer. Okay, depending on the situation, depending on the business need, you may sometimes fit into this persona. There are situations where you might fit into this persona. Okay, depends on the situation, right? And there will be some kind of communication like this. So service consumer will make a call to the service provider will process the request and it will return a response, right? So this is how it works. So service oriented architecture is also like a client server architecture. Now sometimes what happens is these two parties may not know each other directly. These two parties may not know each other directly. So we need some kind of mechanism or some kind of a tool which helps in this collaboration. I'll give you an example. Okay, so let's say I'm living in Delhi as of now. Let's say I move to Bangalore. Okay, and I'm looking for a flat, right? I'm looking for a flat, and so who is a service provider? The person who owns the flat is kind of a service provider, right? Isn't it? and I am looking for a flat, so I am a consumer. Yes. Now, what we typically do we typically know the owners of the flat individually? Do we know them individually? Let's say I go tomorrow, go to US, right? Will I know the flat owners individually?
No.
So what do we typically do?
Brokers.
Okay, so we look for some kind of intermediators, right? Some agents, right? Broker is also a word which now, but nowadays we use more fancy words, right? We go and meet the collaborators, right? Nobody will write outside their shop that I'm a broker, because a broker is not a very graceful word, but yes, that is correct. So we will meet some kind of a collaborator, right? So the collaborator might have physical existence, it might have the virtual existence also, right? So these days everyone have online existence, right? So first thing you will do if you're an IT guy, right, you will go to maybe Magic Bricks, or maybe something like, I don't know, there are I'm not staying outside, but yeah, sulekha.com or
OLX
what,
also.
or OLX. Okay, very nice. So we have so many such platforms where you will go and you will try to search for the different options available in the locality where you want to stay, right? Now once you find, okay, you find a flat, it is available to be rent out. So what happens is, then do these people have any role to play once you find it out? No, right? After that, the communication is between service consumer and service provider, right? Their job is like a to ensure that two parties can meet each other, right? Another example is, let's say you're planning to you're planning to look an alliance for your younger brother. Okay, some of you might be looking for alliance for yourself also. Okay, but let's assume it is for younger brother. Okay, then what do we do typically these days? We go and create a profile on maybe jeevansathi.com, or what are other, I don't know what other matrimonial profiles do we have, right? So you create a profile, you become a service provider, right? I mean, I'm just trying to give some examples, right? Then there will be a lot of people who will be looking for alliances, right? Maybe somebody is looking for an alliance for their daughter, for sister. They might see your brother's profile, and then there is a collaboration, right? And once they find a suitable profile, then do you invite Jeevan Sathi people in the marriage? No, right? Does the bride or groom go to jeevansathi.com's house? No, right? So the point I'm trying to convey is that the role of jeevansathi.com or this Magic Bricks is to enable the collaboration, right? To give a platform so that people can collaborate easily. And that is where, whenever we are talking about the service consumer provider concept, there are two possibilities. One is, you know, the service consumer beforehand, right? So you know the service consumer, then you don't need any kind of this media. But at times we want to develop services which can be used by anyone. So for example, I'll give you another example. There are a lot of mobile apps developed by different companies. So when they develop the mobile app, there can be two types of apps. One is, let's say Infosys is developing a mobile app for their employees. Okay, Infosys is developing a mobile app for their employees. Then in that case, do they need to do a marketing of that? Do they need to do and, you know, put it into some place that others can also come and access it? No, right? But let's say Google is developing some app which they don't know who all people will consume it, right? There can be n number of people who can consume it. So they will definitely want to put that app in some place which is easily accessible. Similarly, when we are working with these services, there is a concept of service registry. These all are old concepts. The only thing which has happened now is they have kind of started using more fancy words, especially as companies like MuleSoft, who have, you know, marketed all these words well, and it looks like that MuleSoft brings all these things to the market, which is 100% wrong. These all, at least I know all these terminologies for more than 10 years when nobody even knew what is MuleSoft, right? So these all concepts have been old. Now these all have been beautified and some new terminologies have come. So the point I'm trying to say, when there is a service provider who is not sure about the service consumer, service provider will go and publish the details about service into service registry, so that some people can come and can see the service registry. Service registry is like a what? Service registry is like a marketplace. Nowadays, you might hear like some senior folks who are there on this session, there are few terminologies like API marketplace. You talk about any big enterprise today, they all are building API marketplace. Okay, these all are not new concepts. These all are old concepts. But now the organizations are realizing the true value of it. So they all are developing their marketplaces. So service provider go and publish the details in the marketplace. And why do we want to publish something to the marketplace? Because we want to generate, we want people to use it, and eventually we want to generate revenue, right? Everything is eventually linked to the money, right? So people want to generate money out of it, or they want to build some brand value, but eventually the end goal is to generate money, right? There might be different mechanisms. Maybe Google might offer 100 things free, right? But you might feel they are doing it for free, but they might be making a lot of money by other media, right? So the point I'm trying to say is there is another concept called as marketplace, which people might want to use, right? Please do not use annotations on my screen. Okay. Just clear it out, Manideep. Can someone please ask Manideep to not to do this? Okay, so the point I'm trying to say is you should know about this funda. Now what happens is there is a client, there is a provider. Now you have to tell me, will the service provider go and deploy the service in the service registry, or what you will actually publish in the service registry? You will publish the details about the service, right? So for example, I am an API trainer. Okay, I am an API trainer who conducts workshops on APIs. Now I want other people to come and get training from me. I want other people to come and attend my workshops. So what I will do is I will advertise for myself. I might run some campaigns on Google Ads. I might run some campaigns on YouTube. I might run some campaign on Facebook and all that stuff, right? So when I do so, what I will publish? Will I publish all my course over there? No, right? I will publish the details about the service. For example, what is the course duration, right? What are the topics I will cover, right? Then what are the timings, right? Maybe the number of years of experience I have. Okay, something about myself. Then maybe the fee structure, right? Then maybe whether you get any certificate for this workshop or not. So I will publish all these details, which many people might see. Those people who will be interested, then those people need to contact me. And for that, what else I need to publish?
Phone number.
Contact details. Yes, which can be an email. So similarly, whenever a service provider wants to publish the details about the service, then they will publish these details about the service, so that a service consumer can come and can check all these details. And if they're comfortable with these details, then they will start interacting directly. Any questions from anyone? Anyone who does not understand service consumer, service provider, orchestration, choreography, anything so far? Anyone who is kind of bored?
Sumit,
Yep.
please tell me once again service register.
Okay. Service registry is a marketplace where you can go and publish the details about the service, so that this registry is kind of accessible to the service consumers also. So let's say you developed a service which is capable of doing the currency conversion. Okay, maybe you are a product based company, or maybe a service based company. You think that this is a very common functionality, lot of people would need it, right? So you developed a service which is capable of doing the currency conversion, right? Now I am building one functionality wherein I need that service. So one thing is I will go and develop my own service, and another thing is that as a part of my solution I want to reuse your service, right? But there might be different service providers, right, who might be offering different services. So for example, you want an app which is capable of converting a document into PDF, right? What do you do? What So you are using a mobile phone, let's say Android phone, and you want an app which is capable of converting a Word document into PDF document. So what do? You go to the app store. Yes, you will type PDF conversion app or Word to PDF conversion. There will be n number of options which will come, right? Some of the apps will be free, some of the apps will not be free, but they will have some advertisements. Some of the apps will be free with no advertisements, right? There will be some ratings, right? So you will see the ratings, you will see the specifications, and you will install that app. Yes. So you can think this service registry is like an app store, right? This is like an app store or marketplace where you can publish the details about the services, or you can think the service registry is like a matrimonial site for the people who look for alliances. Similarly, the people who look for the alliances from the services standpoint, this service registry is a place which lets them to collaborate. Okay, the service registry can be an online portal, okay, where you can go and check the services. So if you will see any big financial institution you talk about, for example, you talk about Facebook, they will also have their own marketplace where you can find all the services offered by them. If you go to about Google, they have their own marketplace, so where they will have details about all their services. Now I as a user feel that I want to make use of their service, I'll go and I'll check that, and if I'm happy, I want to go and subscribe for I will go and subscribe for that service. Right? Is it clear?
Yes, Sumit.
All right, let's continue then. So now we have been talking about services. Now so this is more generic word. Okay, service, business functionality. Now it's a time when we try to convert these all things into technical, because we all are technical people, right? We are not here to listen to the stories which I've been telling, right? Eventually we want to get to the technical level. So these services, right, is a concept, is a business functionality. So you have to understand how these are implemented technically, right? For example, if you talk about OOPS, how do you implement it technically? You write a class, you write some methods, you write some variables, right? That's how you do the OOPS is a concept, right? Object oriented programming is a concept, but how do you materialize that? You start writing classes and all, right? So there has to be some way of materializing the concept into the technical way, right? Similarly, in the case of these service oriented architecture or these services we are talking about, the technical implementation is done with the help of web services, or you can say web service is the implementation of SOA. So if you want to implement service oriented architecture, how do you implement it? With the help of web service, right? So if you're talking about services, so whatever services we have been talking so far from last 1 hour or maybe 50 minutes is nothing about web service. So from the technical standpoint, web service is what service refers to. right? So web service is a combination of two words, web plus service, right? What is service? What is service? A business functionality, or in technical word, I would say it is a software function. So we all all of us who are working in any of the programming languages at some point of time in our careers might have heard about C language. I got to know recently that nowadays people are, I'm not sure if they're learning C languages, people are starting their career with Python and all. I don't know whether C language is part of the curriculum anymore or not, but I feel at least the people who are attending this session today, right, might have learned C language or at least that might have been there in your curriculum. Whether you learned it or not, that's a different ball game altogether. But C language must have been there as part of your curriculum, right? And in C language, there has been a concept called as function, right? So what I'm saying is service is like a software function. You think of it like a function, nothing more than that. What is service? It is like a function. Now, whenever you think about function, what comes to your mind?
It will perform some action.
It performs some action. Very nice. What else?
Based on our inputs.
Okay, so it performs some actions based on some inputs. Okay, or our inputs. What else? Does modularity come to your mind? Does reusability come to your mind? Does parameters come to your mind? Does a return type comes to your mind? Yes. These all things will be important, right? Yes or no? So what I'm trying to say is some block comes here. So function is nothing but block of statements which are complete within itself, take some inputs, perform certain actions on it, and generates an output, right? So when you might have been in your college days, you might have written addition function, factorial function, palindrome function, right? All these functions you might have written. You might have heard of some concepts, right? Call by value, call by reference. I'm sure you must have gone through that phase. Whether you remember it now or you don't remember it, that's fine. We are not here to understand C language, but at least even if you don't remember, you might recollect. Can somebody clear it up? I don't know. Manideep, there will be an option. I think you have created it. Can you just wipe it out?
Yeah, Sumita, I'm trying that, but it is not working for me. Let me try it again.
Okay, then let me do it.
It's fine. Work.
All right. Fine. Because actually this is getting recorded, right? And the session is very, very important. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for
right.
that.
No worries. It happens sometimes. Okay.
Yeah.
But I hope you are focusing on the session and not thinking of drawing, right?
No.
All right. Okay. I was just kidding. Okay. So service is like a software function, right? It is like any ordinary function. Now, let me ask you one thing. Okay. I want this to be a very interactive session, guys, right? Many of you are being invited just because I'm doing it. We are not charging anything separately for this. And believe me, this is a very, very important session. So please try to make it more interactive. So I find it more interesting to share more knowledge with you. Otherwise, it will become like one-way communication, right? So now when we talk about functions, right? Let's say I wrote a addition function. Okay. I am a team lead. I wrote addition function. And let's say you joined my team. I told you, boss, if you want to achieve additional functionality, please do not write a new function. You make use of my function. Okay. Now, as a team member, if you want to reuse the function which was developed by a team lead, how will you make use of how will you reuse a function, or how will you make use of the function developed by your team lead?
By calling it.
Very nice. Okay. We make use of function. I don't know who's answering, but fantastic. we make use of function by calling the function, right? Now let me ask you this: if the name of the function is addition, yes, if the name of the function is addition and you are supposed to reuse it, how will you call this function? What is that syntax, or what is that you need to call this function?
We have to create the object and we have to call the function.
Okay, so in C, let's say we are talking about C, there is nothing like object in C. It's all about Java. Okay, so let's say, so let me ask you, so let's assume there is some function like this. Okay. Okay, and here you have a main, just to make sure that people can visualize something, right? I'm keeping this as open blocks. I know the C language, but I don't want to get into that stuff right now. So here you have a blank, which you have to fill in, right? This may have, let's say int A. Int B. Some stuff may be written over here. Okay, I'm deliberately not writing few things. And now you have to call this function. This is developed by your team lead. How will you do that?
In main function, we have to write the function name add.
Okay,
Add 2, 3.
maybe 2, 3, right? Can we write like this also, only add? Will it work?
Yes, it will work. No, it will not work.
Okay. Anybody who feels that this will work? Anybody who feels this will work?
No, Sumit, it doesn't work.
Why this will not work?
Method signature is not same.
Yes.
Okay, and what needs to be done for that?
You have to pass the
We
parameters.
just need to pass the parameters.
I mean, this one will not work, or you're telling for this one?
Second one.
Okay. So now, okay, you have a very, it's good that you guys have an idea that how to call the function and all, right? Your answers are absolutely correct. But now I'm not here trying to teach you C language, but I'm trying to make sure that you establish a correlation. Establishing a correlation is the key, because the basic is always being polished to take things to the next level, but fundamentals remain same. Okay, and it will continuously remain same for a decade also. So when we are talking about the service, you think service is like a function, right? And whenever you are talking about service, you can play two different personas. What are the two different personas you can play? Either service consumer or service provider, right? So if you are a service provider, will you reuse the function or will you develop the function? If you are a service provider, will you be developing a function or will you be consuming somebody's function?
Develop.
You will develop the function, right? And if you are a service consumer, then
We will use it.
you will use it, right? You will consume it. Yes. Now let me ask you this: if you want to use somebody's function, right, what all details you need to know from that individual?
We should know the signature and parameters. What parameters do we need to pass and what is the return type?
Very nice. So if I have to say in a single word, I would say I need to know the signature of the function. That's all. And what is the signature of the function? Signature of the function consists of
Return type,
name
method
of the
name,
function, okay, number of parameters,
and return type.
yeah, of course, return type. I'll just go in order. Data type of parameters,
And the data types, parameters, data types also.
order of parameters,
Yeah.
right? Order is also important. Return type of the function, right?
And the data types of parameters. Okay.
Data type I've covered, right? And of course, other important thing is the library, right? Where that function resides. If that function is part of some library, yes or no? So if you're working in Java, you need to know the package name. If you are in C, you need to know the library name, right? You might remember, right? You must have been writing hash include what is that we write stdio.h, right? Hash include. I'm sure you guys must be recollecting at least something, right? When I'm writing all these statements.
Conio.h.
Conio.h. What does Conio stands for? Console input output, right? Anyhow, that doesn't matter. I'm just checking. Okay, sometimes I interview people, they tell me that they know basics of the C language, and when I ask you what you know, they say we know that in C language is about cdo.ih and conio.h, which is fine. Okay, so just give me a minute. I think some people are in the lobby. Let me add them in. Okay, let me add them in. So the point I'm trying to convey, which I think is very well received by you, is that we need to know the signature of the function, right? Some people in my sessions answer that, I just need to know the name of the function, which is absolutely a partial correct statement. Only knowing the name of the function is not sufficient. You should need to know all this stuff to call the function effectively, appropriately, and to get something done out of that function, right? Now I told you function is like a service. Function is like a service. Now, if you need to call a service, what do you need to know? If you need to know a service, or sorry, if you want to consume a service, what do you need to know about the service?
Service details.
You need to know the signature of the service. Because we told function is like a service. So we need to know the signature of the service. Now, what is the service? It is nothing but web service. What is web service? Web service is a software function provided at network address over the web. So the only thing is web service is a business functionality that is hosted over a network. It is accessible over the web. You can access it over a network. Typically, these will be accessible using HTTP transport protocol. There are some other protocols also like SMTP, FTP, and all, but we will talk what makes more sense, right? We are not here to do any debate and all that stuff. There might be some more protocols, but typically the protocol which is more predominantly uses HTTP transport protocol, right? So it is accessible over the web. Now, when it is accessible over the web, it becomes all the more easily reusable, right? So web service is a software function provided at a network address over the web. These are typically implemented with the help of SOAP or REST, or I can say that there are two classifications of the web services. Okay, there are two classifications of the web services. Okay, nowadays anybody who say web service, people stare at that person as if he has done any sin. People want that they should call it as APIs. If we call that as a web service, people have become very conscious. They will think that that person is very outdated person. Okay, until few years back when we were using web service, people will look at you in a very respectful manner. But these days I have observed, instead of if you do not call API, but if you call web service, people will look at it you that that person is outdated. That person don't know what is API. Don't worry, we will talk that how API is different from web service. What is the relation? First of all, let me tell you, these are not two different terminologies altogether. There is definitely a considerable amount of overlap between these two, but right now I don't want to get into debate. First, I want you to understand the concept, then I want you to come with your thought process. What is your way of looking at it? Okay, so what I'm saying is there are two classifications of the web service. One is a SOAP based web service and another is a REST based web service. Nowadays there are some other protocols which are evolving. OData based services, you can say. There is another one which is evolving, GraphQL based services, right? But this GraphQL and all these all typically are kind of a, you can say REST, or maybe you can say SOAP based services, or you can say HTTP based services. And within this HTTP based services, you have got REST, right? Now for REST also, there are some more subsets like OData, right? There is GraphQL and all that stuff, right? But don't get into so many details. For now, you can think of like SOAP and REST based services. Now this is also very much debatable. Like I have seen so many people saying HTTP and REST, they will use interchangeably, which is like incorrect. HTTP is like a superset and REST is like a subset of it. But again, that's fine. We will kind of understand these things, and based on the kind of situation you are in, you can mold your speech, right? Because I have seen a lot of people debating, struggling around this. Our job is not to debate, right? We are not bloggers. Our job is to get the job done technically, but we should know different perspectives. So all the perspectives are correct depending on the persona you are playing, right? Or depending on the what kind of situation you are in. Sometimes all the all the perspectives are correct. So you need to understand the different perspectives in the industry, and you can apply the perspective which fits the situation best. That is what I recommend the people, right? So now we'll talk about the SOAP and REST based services or HTTP based services. Let's forget what is SOAP. We don't know what is HTTP. We don't know, but I will just give you the full forms at this moment. What is SOAP? Full form? Service oriented architecture protocol.
Simple object access protocol.
Very nice. Simple object access protocol. I was just wondering if somebody would say service oriented architecture protocol. Okay, nice. What is the full form HTTP?
Hypertext transfer protocol.
Very nice. Hypertext transfer protocol. So whatever browsing we do, that all happens on, or majority of it happens on HTTP only, right? What is REST?
Representational state transfer.
Representational state transfer architecture. This is not a protocol. This REST is not a protocol. This is representational state transfer. This is an architecture which has the tendency to represent or the change in the state of something with the help of certain protocols. Typically for REST, the protocol which is used is HTTP. Yes, but then there are a lot of rules around REST which one needs to know, which we'll talk in detail, not at this moment, but we'll talk about it. Any questions from anyone so far? It has been 70 minutes or 65 odd minutes I've been speaking. So any questions from anyone? All right. So let's move on. I will share these notes across. I want every one of you to please take a look at it one more time, right? Because we are talking too much of the stuff. You may not grasp everything, right? So now going back to the same point that there is a web service, right? So let's say I have developed a SOAP-based web service. Okay. SOAP-based web service. I am a team lead. Okay. Or we will say Prithvi is the team lead. I don't want to feel proud about it. Prithvi is the team lead. Okay. And it is a SOAP-based service. Now I am a team member. I want to use his service, right? So which persona I am playing, service consumer or service provider? If I want to use his service, then am I acting as a service consumer or service provider?
Consumer.
Service consumer. Okay. Now the good thing about SOA is one thing I told, that it does not let you bother that what is the underlying technology in which the service is developed, right? It abstracts the complexity, right? Isn't it? So now who has to bother about the complexity? Service consumer or service provider? So if you're developing a function, right, or you are calling a function, at what point in time you will need to bother about the complexity, while calling the function or while developing the function?
Developing the function.
Right? So if you're playing a role of service provider, you need to bother about the technology, you need to bother about the logic, all that stuff, right? But if you are a service consumer, right, then do you need to bother about it? No, right? So why I'm telling you this is, I told SOA abstracts the underlying complexity, right? So I have not written it, but I have definitely spoken it, that SOA, I will write this terminal, SOA helps in abstracting the underlying technology and complexity, right? So now some people can come and debate with me that I am using service oriented architecture and I am playing a role of service provider, but I need to bother about the technology, I need to bother about the complexity. But that whatever statement I have given, that is more from whose perspective? From the service consumer perspective, right? Once the services are developed, right, or you are using somebody's services, you don't need to bother about the complexity, right? So some statements might be true from the service consumer perspective, and some statements might be true from the service provider perspective. And that's why the community keeps on debating, because sometimes people only think from the service provider perspective, sometimes people think only from the service consumer perspective, but actually few of the things are true from the service consumer perspective, may not be true from the service provider perspective, and other way around, right? So now Prithvi developed a service. Let's say Prithvi developed a service which is capable of doing the addition of two numbers, right? Addition of two numbers. Now what do we need to demand from Prithvi? In order to call the service, in order to reuse the service, or I would say in order to, instead of reuse, I will say in order to consume the service, what do we need? What do we need to demand from the Prithvi?
Service details.
What is that?
Service details.
Very nice. We need to, I would say, service specifications or signature of the service, right? The signature might consist of different things, but the point I'm trying to say is we don't need to demand the code. Do we need to demand the code of the service from Prithvi? Do we need to tell him that please provide me the complete code base of the service? No, right? We need to demand the service specifications or the signature of the service. What will the service specification consist of? Name of the service, right? Capabilities of the service. Capabilities means what all operations a service offer. I'll give you an example also. So when you go to ATM, can you do only the withdrawal of the money from the ATM, or there are some other things you can do?
Some other things we can do.
Okay, can you pull out a mini statement? Can you do an online transfer these days? Can you recharge your mobile, right? Can you change your mobile phone number, right? So there are so many actions you can perform, right, with the ATM service. See, service is ATM service, and within that ATM service there are a lot of operations. So just try to establish that correlation. ATM service, and there are different operations. So what are the different operations? Withdrawal of the amount, mini statement. Okay, I don't know, guys, how does banking work in US? If we have some people from US, Dubai, Please excuse me. I think you all have been in India at some point in time, so you can correlate. Okay, we can do the amount transfer also, right?
Balance check.
We can, very nice. We can do the balance check. We can check the balance, right? We can recharge the phone.
We can change pin also.
Very nice. We can change the pin also. Okay. We can change the pin also. And there might be n number of things we can do. So the point I'm trying to say is whenever you want to consume somebody's service, you should know the name of the service, right? You should know the capabilities of the service. Now you very well told me that as a part of service, there can be different operations. Yes or no? Now, for all these different operations, do you give the same inputs or different inputs?
Different inputs.
Okay. So if you want to withdraw the amount, there'll be some different set of inputs, right? When you want to get the mini statement, maybe you have a different set of inputs. When you want to do an amount transfer, there may be different set of inputs, and there may be some operations where there is an overlap, that some inputs are common and some inputs are different. Do you agree? Yes. So what I'm trying to say is, if you want to reuse a service, knowing the name of the service is important. Knowing the capabilities of the service is important. Then you have to also understand the request and response format associated with each operation. Yes or no? Okay. So when I take you to the ATM, you have to think about ATM, and then you have to come back and think a little bit technically also. Okay. Don't stay in the ATM. You have to come out of the ATM and you have to start thinking technically also. So point I'm trying to say is there are different operations and you have to know the request and response format associated with each operation. Yes. Now you need to know the protocol associated with the operation. So what is the meaning of protocol? Protocol literal definition is set of rules, right? So when you will exchange the data over the web, you have to follow certain rules, right? It becomes important to follow certain rules, and those rules are basically defined with the help of protocol. So we know there is a HTTP protocol, we know there is a SOAP protocol, we know there is a FTP protocol, we know there is a SMTP protocol. So there are different protocols which might be associated with the operation. So you also need to know the protocol associated, because the same protocol you need to follow, right? Yes or no? For example, you go to a hospital, you follow one set of protocol, right? You go to a pub, you follow different set of protocol, right? You go to theater to watch movie. None of these things are happening because of COVID nowadays. But when you go to watch movie, you have a different protocol, right? So whenever we want to basically talk to something, whenever we want to use something, we have to follow protocol. You go to a washroom, you follow a different protocol. You go to a temple, you follow a different protocol, right? So whenever you want to use some service, whenever you want to consume some service, you have to understand that the protocol you need to adhere to, but there will be always a protocol. Okay, that protocol will take care how your data will be exchanged, right, internally and all that stuff. Then other important thing is about security. Yes or no? Whether the operation which you want to perform, does it have any security on the top of it or not, right? Yes. So when you go to ATM, is there any security?
No.
What is the security which helps you to? You have your PIN, right? Yes or no? For
Yes.
any of these operations, can you perform any of these operations without knowing the PIN?
No.
Okay. So you have some security, right? So you need to know about the security. Next, very, very important thing is you need to know the location of the service. Okay. So now let's say there is a new restaurant in the city, okay, which is offering the fantastic food. Ambience is awesome. Maybe they have the music over there. Now, when you want to use their service, what is the most important thing you need to know? Where that place or where that restaurant is located, right? So similarly, when you want to use anybody's service, what do you need to know? The location of the service. So the point I'm trying to tell you is, whenever you will demand the specifications, typically a service provider, a good service provider, okay, a responsible service provider should automatically share all these details with you, right? So I'll give you another example. If you, let's say, if you purchase a smartphone or a smart television, right? Do you get a user manual?
Yes.
And what is the role of that user manual? To guide you, right, how to use that. Same is the role of this specifications. If you want to talk to the service, right, if you want to establish a connectivity with the service, if you want to interface with the service, right, interface means a boundary, and you want to go and connect to that boundary, right, so that you can give a connected experience to the end party, you need to go through the specification. Specification is more like a user manual. Until you know about the service completely, you cannot use it effectively. So a service provider typically should provide it to you. If the service provider has not provided, you can always go and demand for it. Yes, you can go and demand for it. If you are working in the soap world, if you're working in the soap world, these specifications are represented in the form of a XML based file. అన్నగారు మ్యూట్ లో ఉండండి. So when you're working in the soap world, these specifications are represented in the form of a XML based file called as WSDL, which is also called as web service description language. This is not web service a definition language. Are we defining the web service? No, we are describing the web service. So this will help an end user to know the details about the web service, and there is a definition which is separately built, but that definition will be always adhering to the description, right? And this description will help the end user to basically go and create a web service call, right? Like the way we do function call, we will do a web service call, right? But how that web service call is built based on the specifications which are described in a file. And what is that file? Web service description language. It is human readable file, and it can be read by machines also. So there are a lot of softwares right now, right? You talk about Java or .NET, those all have a capability to go and read a WSDL file and develop the code automatically, right? To basically call that service, right? Because eventually we have to make two systems to talk to each other, right? When we have been taking all these examples, but eventually there are two different systems which need to talk to each other, right? Because we are integration people. So when we are talking about the integration, we are not talking about the integration of two human beings. We are talking about the integration of two applications, maybe running on the same machine or different machines, right? And whatever communication has to happen, it has to happen in a way which can be understood by machine, right? So this specifications are in the form of XML. These are human readable as well as machine readable. So machines can read these specifications and can guide you that how your request should look like. If you are an expert, you can write the code from a scratch also, right? By reading that WSDL file, you can write the code from scratch, or else there are tools in the market, or there are classes or interfaces, or there are utilities in all the languages which have the capability to basically parse the WSDL file and create a stub for you, which is capable of calling the service. You might need to tweak few things over there, but majority of the code will be written similarly in Del Boomi world, in Del Boomi world. So we talk about the Del Boomi world. We'll go into the Del Boomi world here very quickly. In the Del Boomi world, we will go here and we'll type soap. Do we have something to consume soap services? What is that? We in Del Boomi world, we have, what is that? Web services soap client, which is capable of calling the soap services. And how do they know how to call the service? By going through the specifications. And how are specifications described? Specifications are described with the help of what?
Wisdom.
Very nice. With the help of WSDL file, right? So now if you go here, let's say you drag and drop, you go to connection. Is it asking for some WSDL? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Now our Del Boomi developers who are very fresh, they will know that this is WSDL. But what does WSDL consist of? They will know half, and it is not their mistake. Nobody has told them, right? So this WSDL can be a .WSDL file, or it can be a WSDL URL also. Since the service itself is accessible over the web, typically the description about the web service will be also accessible over the web, right? So what you have to do is, whatever is the location of the web service. So location of the web service is also called the endpoint of the service. Endpoint means the place where the service is accessible, right? It is also called the endpoint of the service. Now to that endpoint, to the given endpoint, if we append $WSDL, then it gives you the WSDL URL. This may not be true in all the 100% of the cases, but I can say 99% cases it is true that you go to the endpoint, you append $WSDL, and you will get the complete WSDL loaded. And which language is WSDL written in?
XML.
XML.
Very nice. It is written in XML format, right? And one more important note is, there is a convention in the industry where people assume that WSDL is used only for soap services, but that is not true. Okay, this is kind of a trend which is followed in the industry, but it is not necessary that WSDL can only be used for soap services. What is the full form of WSDL? Web Service Description Language. The full form is not SOAP Web Service Description Language. So WSDL can be used to represent HTTP services also. But generally, as the industry is growing, SOAP is always described with the help of WSDL. And for REST and all, there are different other methodologies which have evolved, but then there is no such hard and fast rule. Any questions so far?
Can you explain the location of the web service?
Come again, Priyanka.
Can you explain the line location of the web service is also called as endpoint, and if we append that?
Okay, I'll show you with an example. Okay, I'll show you with an example. Any other question from anyone?
Sumit, I have a doubt. Like, since I'm from the Java background, so I'd worked in a project where we were creating several services like microservices, and they were interacting with each other through JMS queue. So is it related, like, can we also call it as SOA architecture?
Yes, because JMS is also one other protocol which we can use. So SOAP internally can use different, it depends. I don't know what exactly you build, but SOAP is a messaging protocol. Okay, SOAP itself is a messaging protocol, and that messaging protocol will also internally use one transport protocol, and that transport protocol can be FTP, that can be SMTP. This is also a transport protocol. That can be GMS, and that can be HTTP also. Most of the SOAP services which we use, right, especially in integration world, are nothing but HTTP over SOAP. Or I'm sorry, SOAP over HTTP will be the right thing. So what I'm trying to say is SOAP is a messaging protocol, but it internally will use any of these transport protocols. Okay, so if so, a SOAP has its own standards. Okay, if you're following those standards and internally, if you were using any of these transports, maybe then yes, you were using a SOAP service.
What is transport service, Sumit?
So transport is a protocol. So when you basically, exchange anything over the internet or over the web, so there are different layers. Okay, so there is something you might have heard of, TCP IP.
Okay, are you talking about transport layer?
Yes. So
okay,
those that transport layer, whatever we have, so there has to be certain protocol which basically goes and help in exchanging the data over the transport layer, and these are the different transport protocols. There are many others. Okay, but these are the different transport protocols.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so guys, I think there has been a lot of information which has been exchanged, or which has been, shared. We'll take a 5 minutes break over here. Okay, you can grab some water for yourself. Okay, and then let's meet at 9:10. Okay, it's 9:04 by my clock, so we'll meet in another 6 minutes. Okay, so please make sure you come back on time, and we'll continue from here. All right, so what we concluded is, so this, sometimes I write notes which might sound like contradictory. So I'm saying WSDL is used only for SOAP services. This is a myth, right? This is not correct. We may use it for other protocols also, but then across the industry, this has gradually become a kind of a convention, you can say. And for REST, right, there are other conventions. For example, there is a way called as WADL. There is a way called as Swagger, which is now changed to OAS. There is a way called as RAML, and there are some other ways also for defining the specifications of which services for the REST services. But even WSDL can be used. Generally, the convention is some tools use WADL, Swagger, OAS. I personally believe down the line, as we progress, OAS is going to be the standard for REST. OAS is also called as Open API Specifications 3.0. So this is going to be the standard probably for REST, but right now REST is more flexible. There is no such hard and fast rule around the specifications of the REST. There are different mechanisms. I have listed only few. There are some more ways, but these are more commonly used in the industry, right? Especially these three. Okay. But I don't want to confuse you with too many things. Okay, just in the notes, we should have it for the record, but right now we'll focus on WSDL. That's all. Okay, so now WSDL is a XML based file, which we understand, right? So now before we talk about any XML based file, it becomes very significant for us to understand what is XML, right? We should know what is XML. So what does XML stands for?
Extendable markup language.
It stands for extensible markup language. What is the meaning of markup? Markup is like, it is a tag based language, right? So whatever information you write in the form of some tags. There is a start tag and there is a close tag, right? These tags in XML world are referred as elements. So we do not use the name tags, but we call them as elements. Extensible means there are two explanations for this, that the elements we define in XML are extensible in itself. That is one reason it is called as extensible markup language. Another reason is this language itself is extensible to create other languages. And what are other languages which has been created from XML? XSD, WSDL, XPath, XQuery, XSLT. These all have origination from XML only, right? That's why this is called as extensible markup language. Now, when you're working on any language, right, or whenever you want to learn any language, knowing the grammar of the language is very important, right? So if you remember in our school days, right, there used to be English grammar and English literature. Yes or no? So grammar of the language is very important. So programming, whatever we do, that are eventually nothing but languages, right? But the only difference is those languages are understood by the machine, right? So whenever you want to learn any programming language, let's say Python or XML or JSON, anything for that matter, right? Knowing the grammar of that specific language is very, very important. And this grammar of the language is also called as syntax. What is it called as? Syntax. So knowing the syntax is very, very important. And you cannot know the complete grammar of any language in one shot, right? So you might be learning English for 10 plus years. At least the people who are attending today's session might be learning English from last 10 plus years, or might be speaking in English for 10 plus years. But do we know the complete grammar? Can we say that whatever we speak is 100% grammatically correct? No, right? But then we must know certain basics which are very, very significant. Unless we know those basics, we cannot basically talk in that language. And once we know basics, okay, that's fine. Gradually we can improvise, right? And same thing goes good in your technical world also. So there are a lot of rules, but there are certain basic rules which one needs to know from day one, right? Similarly, we will try to see what are those rules. And then once we know those rules, we will start playing around with the XML, right? I'm telling you, these sessions going to be long running session. I'm not targeting to finish it tomorrow but then I can guarantee you after attending all these sessions, your knowledge on APIs and web services will be very, very strong. Okay. So we may have this being continued on the next weekend also, right? So what I'm trying to say is over here that we need to know some grammatical rules, some basic rules for XML. Now, what are those? An XML doc must have a root element. XML document must have a root element. I have seen a lot of people struggling, which is very, very simple issue. So what they do is they write some XML document. They know how to write XML, but they forget about this rule. So what is the meaning? XML document must have a root element. So how do we represent the information in XML file like this? Let's say name, right? Sumit Agarwal. So here name is an element and this Sumit Agarwal is the data inside these elements, right? So now let's say I'm writing some XML file, right? So I write like Sumit Agarwal, this is fine, right? Now, for example, I'm writing the same information like this. Let's say first name, Sumit, last name, Agarwal, like this. What happens is these two elements are at the same level in the hierarchy, right? But for an XML to be a well-formed XML, what is a well-formed XML? An XML is said to be a well-formed XML if it is syntactically correct. An XML is said to be well-formed XML if it is syntactically correct. Now for this XML to be a valid XML, these two elements must be having a root element. That root element name might be name like this.
Tinamma.
I'll request everybody to be on mute. Okay. So the name of the root element can be anything because XML allows us to define the name of elements as per our convenience. So XML does not say that the name of the element has to be this or that. You can choose the name of the elements. That flexibility which you get comes with a caveat, which I will explain you what is a disclaimer you need to follow or you need to keep in mind. But for the time being, what I'm trying to tell you is having a root element is mandatory. If you try to write like this, you might feel that everything is absolutely correct. It is not going to work. And anytime if you're confused whether your XML is correct or not, you go to web, you write XML validator, put your XML over there and just validate. That will tell you whether your XML is a legitimate XML or not. Right? So what is the second rule? That XML allows you to define the name of elements as per your convenience. The third one is each starting element must have a corresponding closing element. Each starting element must have a corresponding closing element. So if I'm starting an element, then I need to ensure that it should also have a corresponding closing element, right? If there is no corresponding closing element, then it is not a well-formed XML. Are you guys following so far?
Yes, Sumit.
All right. Next thing is all the elements in the XML file are case sensitive. These all elements in the XML file are case sensitive, which means if you're writing the name of the element like this while starting it, then while closing it, you should not use this convention. This is not considered as a well-formed XML because you had chosen a naming convention, right? Where N was in lowercase, but while closing it, you change it to uppercase. Since all these elements are case sensitive, that's why this is not considered as a well-formed XML, right? And the next thing is XML document is composed of a hierarchy of elements, which means there can be an element within it, there can be another element, and it can also have attributes. It can also have attributes. We'll talk about it. So these are some of the basic rules you need to keep in mind. And after that, you're good. So there's one more, which I forgot. I should have told this first. XML document should have a XML prologue. Okay, XML prologue, it is always the first line in an XML file. It is always the first line in an XML file. Okay, there must not be any spaces before this. I have seen a lot of people doing this mistake. There must not be any spaces before this. So when you are trying to write an XML file, so for example, I will write, let's say class.xml. Okay, here .xml is the extension of the file. .xml is the extension of the file. So when I start writing it, I will start like this. XML version equal to 1.0, and then I will write encoding, because whatever data we are writing that, right, that is internally converted into bytes and bits, right? Because everything eventually has to be converted into what? Machine level language, right?
Zeros and ones.
Yes, zeros and ones, right? That is the beauty of your computers. Eventually everything is zeros and ones, right? So everything, whatever we are writing, right, this is a human readable format which is internally converted and represented with the help of zeros and ones. So there are different encoding formats. UTF-8 means so there are different encoding formats. I don't remember what does T stand for. Maybe it is universal. I don't remember. T. I don't want to give you the wrong full form. Universal transmission format or whatever it is. You can check it on internet. 8 means for each whatever data you write here, right? So 8 bits of data is used to represent that information. Then you have UTF-16. So when you use 16, it covers more character sets, but the representation will be much lengthier. So generally you will see UTF-8 or 16 being used in the industry, and this is also called as XML prologue. And this is how you write the comments in XML. How do you write comments? Angular bracket starts, exclamation mark, hyphen hyphen, and then your stuff, hyphen hyphen, this angular bracket close. This is called as comments. What are comments? Comments are readable statements which make the file not readable statements, non-executable statements. Comments are non-executable statements which make the file more readable and understandable. So this is how you write, prologue. I will start once again from here. Then you may have some root elements. So let's say my root element name is root. Do I have the flexibility to choose the name of the elements?
Yes.
Yes, we do have. So this is your root element. Then you may have some stuff, let's say first name. Then you may have last name. Something like this. Okay, so this is a well-formed XML file. When can we say a XML file is a well-formed XML file?
Once it is syntactically correct.
Absolutely correct, right? Once it is syntactically correct. So what we'll do is we'll go here on the web. We will write XML validator online. Validate XML files. So there are a lot of validators. You can go here. We'll close this all unnecessary stuff. We'll say validate. So what is it saying? No errors were found. So is it a legitimate XML, whatever we gave? I don't know where that XML went away, but that's fine. You can look for a better validator. We have lot many online. Okay, here is your file. So this is a legitimate file, well-formed file. Now there is another concept called as valid XML. Now a lot of people use this terminologies interchangeably. Well-formed XML, valid XML, right? And believe me, these all things nobody will talk in Boomi trainings and all, right? And that's why that API part is always weak. So a valid XML is definitely a well-formed XML. Plus, there needs to be a one more quality which needs to be met. So what I can say is a valid XML is always a well-formed XML, but other way around is not true. I mean, other way around is not always true, I will say. So what I'm saying is there is a well-formed XML. There is a valid XML. Valid XML is nothing but well-formed for sure. And there is one more quality which needs to be met to call it as a valid XML. We'll talk about it. But before we get, so we will just pin it for now and we'll come back to this file. So this XML file is composed of certain elements. And what is the name of root element in this XML file?
Root.
Very nice. Root is the name of the root element. Now these elements in XML file can be classified into three. So there can be three classifications of the elements which we have in XML file. There are simple elements. There are simple elements. Then there are complex elements. And then there are mixed elements. Okay, generally in my sessions I talk about these two only. Okay, but okay, that's fine. But there are three: simple, medium, and complex. Oh, sorry, simple, mixed, and complex. You will rarely see these being used, so that's why I don't talk about it, to avoid the confusion. But just to let you know that yeah, these are the three different classifications we have. Now, what does it mean? An element is said to be simple element if it holds the data directly within itself, which is of primitive data type. What are your primitive data types? Integer, float, character, probably string also, right? What is complex element? Okay, please excuse me for these spelling mistakes which I continue doing, right? But I have my own style, so I will stick to that for now. Okay, complex element means an element is said to be complex element if it holds further elements within itself. These elements typically represent an entity or an object such as student, employee, order, invoices, right, etc. An element is said to be complex element if it holds further elements within itself. So these elements typically it represents some objects, right? And what is mixed element? What is a mixed element? An element is said to be mixed element if it holds a further elements within itself along with the data as well. I mean, I will along with the data as well. This might be a little confusing. I'll explain you with an example, right? So we will go back to this XML file and we'll try to categorize. Now, in this case, what do you think? This root element, is it a simple element or a complex element? I can say there is no mixed element over here. Okay, I will myself help you with that. There are only either simple elements or complex elements. So now based on the definition I gave, what do you think? This root element is a simple element or a complex element?
Complex element.
Complex.
It is a complex element. Why? Because why it is a complex?
Because it holds
It
other
has
objects.
further data inside.
It holds further elements within itself, right? First name and last name are like child elements for the root element, right? And root element is like a parent to them. Yes or no? What about this one? Simple element. Very nice. What about this one? Simple, right? So this is more like a parent element. This is like a child element. So this is also a child element. Child to whom?
Root.
Root. Very nice. And what is the relation between the first name and last name? These are more like siblings to each other. These are like siblings. So these are also called as sibling elements. Okay, nobody is going to ask you in such detail. Good to know. If you can't recollect, if you can't recall at some point in time, that's fine. All right, but whatever I'm telling, this all has a role to play as we move ahead. Okay, I'm not just telling because I know this all will have some kind of use at a later stage when we start talking about some more advanced topics. So now what about mixed elements, right? So mixed element will look something like this. We have a root, and within root maybe you have something like this written. Very rarely you will see mixed elements, but root, this is how it will look. You will have root, here you will have the data, and you will have further elements also. So such elements are called as, in that case, root is not a complex, it is a mixed element. It is a mixed. It holds the data and further elements also within itself. All right. So now what I'm trying to say is we talked about service oriented architecture where there is a service A, okay, and there is a service B, which needs to communicate with each other. What do these services exchange?
Data.
These services exchange message. That's what I have told right in the beginning of the session. What is the core of service oriented architecture? Services and messages. Of course, message is nothing but the data only, but let's try to acclimatize ourselves to those terminologies which are the correct ones. Okay. So these exchange messages, right? And what are the more commonly used formats, data formats to represent these messages?
XML and JSON.
Very nice. XML and JSON. Let's first assume it is XML. Okay. I want everybody to pay attention over here. This is very, very important, guys. XML, you guys mentioned that the more commonly used data formats are XML and JSON, which is absolutely correct. Right now, I'm assuming the data format is XML, right? Which needs to be used to exchange the data between service A and service B. Very nice. Now let's say service B was developed by person with the name John. Okay. And service A is developed by, let's say, the person Jackie. Okay. But Jackie, while developing its own service, realized that my service will be more useful if I can reuse the service developed by person John, right? So even when you start working, right, in real time, you might develop one service, but while developing a service, you might try to reuse or consume somebody else's service to make things more meaningful, right? Now, if person Jackie, who is developing service A, wants to consume a service B, which is developed by person John, and it is a SOAP based service, what is required by person Jackie from person John?
Visual.
Very nice.
Specifications.
The person needs specifications, which is absolutely correct. And in the case of in the SOA world, the specifications are represented with the help of what? WSDL file, right? So WSDL file can be represented as a .WSDL file, or it can be a WSDL URL. Now, one important thing is SOAP only allows the data format to be XML. So this is a catch with the SOAP, that SOAP only allows the data format to be XML. So in this case, can we use JSON?
No.
Typically, we can't use it. Now somebody might come up with some kind of workarounds. That's fine. Even I know about those workarounds, but then typically it has to be XML, right? That's what standard says. So SOAP only allows the data format to be XML. Now this all is fine. Now you tell me one thing. Can service B accept any legitimate XML? I'll repeat my question. We understand that there is a specification file. Okay, that is exchange. We understand it is a SOAP service. The SOAP, since it allows only XML, let's say this person Jackie is trying to send a legitimate XML. Okay, maybe this XML. It is definitely a legitimate XML. You can check on the internet, go to the XML validator, and you can check it out. Now, let's say this person Jackie tries to push this XML towards service B. My question is, will service B accept any well-formed XML?
No, it should follow like the specifications mentioned in the WSDL file along with the valid XML.
Who
It
was that
should
person speaking?
Anamika.
Very nice. It will not accept any XML file you send. It might be so do not use the word valid. It cannot accept any well-formed XML. It may be a well-formed XML, that's fine, but it will only accept the XML which is legitimate plus in compliance to the specifications. So the point I'm trying to convey is, as a part of the specifications, right? As a part of the specifications, person John must have told that these are the n number of operations I offer as a part of the service, and for each operation there is a specified format which you need to adhere to. That data format might be XML, that's fine, but within that XML also there can be different possible structures, there can be different possible schemas. See, schema is nothing but a structure, right? So it might happen that it is expecting the details about an order, but you are sending some route. So though it is a well-formed XML, but service B is not going to accept it. Service B is going to reject it. It will say that it is not compliant to the schema. So the point I'm trying to say is, whenever an XML is sent to the service provider, a service consumer needs to ensure that that data, whether it is XML or JSON for that matter, right? It has to be in compliant with the schema which is specified in the specifications. In case of SOAP, we are only talking about XML, but when we go to the rest, we will also talk about JSON. So a service consumer always needs to ensure that the data being sent is in compliance to the specifications which is defined in a specification file, which in this case happens to be a visual. So what I'm trying to say is, within the visual file, there will be a section called as a schema section. Schema section again can be of two types: internal, external, which we will talk. But this schema section has the capability to basically signify that what would be the request and the response format, and only the requests which adheres to that format are considered as valid XML. So when I left a blank over here, a valid XML is the one which is well formed plus schema compliant. What is the meaning of schema? Schema means nothing but a structure. Who will define that structure? The schema or the structure is defined by whom?
Business.
Service provider.
service provider.
Service provider, of course. I mean, of course, we will take inputs of the business, which is also correct. But from the technical standpoint, the schema or the structure is defined by service provider. Right? So it's very common, right? So let's say if you go to a theater, right, you are not allowed to carry any eatables, right? Who is defining that rule? Theater person is the service provider. They are defining the rule, and we have to adhere to that rule, right? If we are not adhering to the rule, we are not allowed to use their services. As simple as that, right? Similarly, service provider defines certain rules, and one rule is about the schema. Unless we adhere to that schema, our XML is not considered as valid XML. It may be a well-formed XML, but it is not considered as a valid XML for that service. Any questions so far from anyone?
So this, I'm not getting why you have written internal and external.
Okay, I didn't talk about that.
Okay.
Let's assume this is not there. Okay, I told that I'll talk about it. So some placeholders I deliberately leave so that we don't forget to cover those things, but I haven't talked about it. I'll be covering that.
Sumit, I have a doubt. Like if we are consuming any of the soap service, so like whatever service we are consuming, we'll also be having the WSDL format with us before consuming the service so that we can structure the message accordingly.
Absolutely. You cannot consume the service effectively unless you have a WSDL. Now, if somebody is not providing WSDL, you may try some permutations, combinations, which is fine, but that's not the right way of doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So now we have talked a lot of theory. Let's see few things practically. Okay. We'll go here. We will search on the net calculator soap service. So there is some online service providers, right? There are some companies who have developed their soap services and they have published on the internet. If you want to learn more about soap, if you want to play around with the soap, that will be a little helpful for you. Okay, I don't know why it is taking so much of time to load, but that's fine. Okay, we got redirected to something which we didn't expect to. Okay, that's fine. Let's try the next one. Okay, I'm sorry, I think I stopped presenting. Okay, give me a minute. This is kind of. Okay, here we go. So can you see there is some calculator web service? Yes. So what it is saying, so this is a kind of a documentation in some plain English. Perform simple maths over the web. The following operations are supported. How many operations are supported?
2.
2. But what is saying for formal definition, what you have to refer?
Service description. Service description.
Service description. I click on this. Are you redirected to some service description? Yes. This is called as a WSDL URL. Now we'll copy this URL and we'll keep in our notepad. Yes, this is the WSDL URL. If you go to this service, so is it a service or a service specification?
Specification.
This is not a service. This is a service specification. That's all. Is it a XML based file?
Yes.
And which is the root element?
Definition.
Definition is the root element. Some people might say WSDL : definitions. That's fine for now. Scroll down, 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 down. Do you see some location?
Yes.
Okay. I will copy that also. Now coming back to my older point, I told you can access the WSDL URL by appending $WSDL to the endpoint. Is that true over here?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the point basically, which is this is kind of an address to access the service, and this is the address to access the specifications of the service. Right? Now this service, have we developed this service?
No.
Okay. So somebody else has developed, but can we consume this service? Yes. And if we want to consume it, what do we need to understand? The specifications? Yes or no?
Yes, we should know the method name, function name.
Yes. So in this one, in this service, can a service expose more than one operation?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
So what we will do is, right now we don't know what is WSDL, okay? But I can tell you one thing, but after attending my sessions, you will be able to understand each and every single line which is written over here. So I will just do a control F blindly and I will look for operation. Do you find something like operation?
Yes, add and subtract.
We have add, we have subtract, we have operation return again. We will park that for now, time being. We will just focus on these two. So there are how many operations? 2 operations. Yes. Now, if you want to consume it, right? So generally you will use, right, some kind of testing tools to test the service. So before you start working in Boomi and all, you should always use some kind of testing tool to test the service. So you can perform 2 roles. You can play 2 different personas whenever you're working with these services. What are those 2 personas?
Testing and development.
You can either consume it or you can produce it. Okay. So now consuming is always easy, right? And producing is tough. I mean, and that's applicable in all different aspects of life, even in the technical world. Consuming somebody else's service is easy, whereas developing our service is tough. But first we will see that this is a service which was developed by someone else, right? Now what I will do is I will try to use some tool, okay, to test this service. So you will need to download and install SOAP UI. What you need to download and install? SOAP UI. It is an industry standard, very, very commonly used tool. There are so many other tools in the market, but generally, if you want to test any SOAP services, it is recommended to make use of SOAP UI. There is no hard and fast rule. If you like some other tool, please go ahead and use it. Okay, my recommendation is you get a SOAP UI, right? So now what I'll do is I have also got a SOAP UI over here. And here what I'll do is I will go and I will say SOAP. What I will say? SOAP. And here it is asking me for some visual. Yes, I will paste that visual URL and I will hit OK. So when I scroll towards left, okay, let's close everything which is visible right now like this. Don't get confused. We are talking only about this one. So this service actually has 2 bindings. 2 bindings means 2 different methodologies to establish the integration. When I want to bind with someone, it means I want to collaborate, I want to integrate, right? So for example, if you want to place an order via Amazon, right? You can do it using a mobile app. You can do it using a web application also, right? So this means these are 2 different binding methods. So here for this service, there are 2 different binding methods. Let's park one. Let's focus on one. Can you see there are 2 operations? Add.
Yes.
Can you see some requests over here? Is it automatically getting generated for you? Because this SOAP UI tool is capable of parsing the visual file. It read the complete description automatically and it automatically generated a request for you. But why the name is A? What is this TEM? What is this envelope? What is this header? You gradually need to understand it. Okay, and we will understand it. But for the time being, what I will do is I will give some input, let's say 10, 20. I fire it. Do we get some response?
Yes.
Do we need to bother that what is the underlying technology in which this service was written?
No need.
No need, right? It is definitely written in .NET. I can tell you that, but that doesn't matter to us. We never, did it ever ask us that anything related to any technology? No, right? So that's what I was telling, that services helps in abstracting the underlying technology. You don't need to care. And that's why these are so demanding. That's why everybody wants to use services, because it helps us to build a solution where we can basically amalgamate multiple different technologies also, right? And but still our way of communication will remain uniform. If this service was developed in PHP also, our way of making a call might not have changed. Okay, I mean, when I say our way, means our request will not change. We don't need to know anything about PHP. I mean, okay, so the request will always be uniform. These all are open standards. This HTTP is an open standard. SOAP is an open standard. Okay, these are not proprietary to any specific company or tool for that matter. Now let's say what I do is I get rid of this. Maybe I try like this. It's still working, but does it give the right result? No, right? So this is not being considered. Yes or no? Ideally, it depends on the implementation of the service. This must have failed actually, but that depends. So some service provider, they will do the validation of the request. Some service provider, they will not validate the request. Maybe this service provider is not validating the request. That's why it did not fail, but definitely the response is incorrect, right? It is only considering this. So the point I'm trying to say is your request has to be absolutely in the format which is schema compliant. So let's say we try to pass this. What is the output we are getting? 0, right? Are we getting the right input output? No. So ideally, this implementation of the service is not validating all these things. Okay. But generally, in many cases, there will be those validations. And when that validations are enabled, it will throw an error. But in this case, maybe they are not validating. They are just looking for those specific elements. If those are found, it's okay. If those are not found, they're returning 0, which is fine. But the point I'm trying to convey over here is that whenever you are trying to consume a service and whenever you're trying to create a request, that has to be schema compliant, then only the service will work in the way you will anticipate. Otherwise, it may either error out or it may give you some unexpected output. Okay, the behavior might be unexpected. Any questions so far? Now, do you understand what is a WSDL URL and all? So what is a WSDL file? For example, you go and save this file, save as, right? You save as, let's say, calc.WSDL. Okay, this is your WSDL file. Okay, maybe I didn't save it correct. No worries. Yeah, it is correct only, calc.WSDL, or maybe I will edit it with a notepad++. So there are two extensions. I will save it again. Here I will change it to all types. I'll say calc. Okay. Okay, that's fine. But this is how your file will look like in a notepad++. Now in this file, do you see, let's search for some section called as schema. Do you see there is some schema keyword?
Yes. Yes.
It starts from here. So what this section must be trying to do? This section must be trying to define the structure of the request and response pertaining to different operations. We'll talk more on this, right? I'm kind of exhausted now. We'll continue talking on this in tomorrow's session. We will try to see how to decode a WSDL, how to understand each and every element of WSDL and XSD in tomorrow's session. Once we understand that, then we will also talk about one very, very important topic, which many people are confused about, is namespaces. If we can complete these three, then we will see how to consume SOAP service in Boomi. Okay, that's how we will structure it. Then we will see how to expose SOAP service in Boomi. And then once we understand even that, then we will start our journey for REST. And then we will see how or why people are considering API as something different thing. Then we will speak what is API gateway. And then we will speak what is API management. Yes. And then we'll put a pause. So if you're attending these sessions, please attend regularly. Being a guest in these sessions will not help you. Choice is yours, right? And I'll share the recording across, right? Maybe you can ping your email IDs in the chat window. There are a lot of people who have joined. I really don't remember. I will definitely share about the people whom I know. But yeah, if you still want to share your IDs, please do that.